On a quiet afternoon, she went to show a house, as she had done countless times before. It should have been routine. Another house, another client. There was no reason to be afraid, and yet, something was wrong. This case shook people to their core as a chilling series of events unfolded, revealing a dark intersection of ambition and betrayal. It all began when a woman disappeared after she went to show a house to yet another client. As the investigation progressed, secrets emerged, painting a shocking and gruesome picture of what had happened. As more details surfaced, they became almost too horrific to believe. The police played chilling audio recordings filled with the victim's final words, leaving everyone present shaking with emotion. Dear viewers, liking, commenting, and subscribing only takes a few seconds, but it means so much to us. Every click and comment fuels our passion. Thanks. Beverly Carter was a woman who seemed to embody warmth, resilience, and an enduring spirit. At 50 years old, she lived a life deeply rooted in love and family in the serene town of Scott, near Little Rock, Arkansas. Her home was one of those quiet havens where love grows steadily over the years, where laughter echoes in every room and memories settle like soft dust on familiar furniture. She and her husband, Carl, had been together for 35 years, a marriage that had weathered its share of storms but thrived nonetheless. They had 3 grown sons, Carl Jr., Chad, and Christopher, and a blossoming legacy of 5 grandchildren. Each of them was a precious part of Beverly's heart, a heart that had been both scarred and fortified by life's unpredictable turns. Their love story was as charming as any. It began when Beverly was just a wide-eyed 18-year-old working at a local dairy bar, serving milkshakes and hamburgers to a steady stream of customers. Among them was Carl, a construction worker who was quick to notice the pretty girl behind the counter. His flirtation was lighthearted, playful. "I knew I was going to get a wife when I got that hamburger," he had joked. At the time, it probably sounded like just another line, but Carl's instinct had been right. Their connection blossomed swiftly, and before long, they were married. Not long after, their first baby, Carl Jr., was born, and the young couple settled into the bliss of early family life. But as often happens, life wasn't always so easy. Hardship soon arrived, economic pressures mounting as Carl's job in construction took him all over the place, leading them to move frequently. Money was tight, and at times they found themselves leaning on family just to get by, sharing homes and doing what they could to stretch what little they had. During those lean years, Beverly stayed home, raising their 3 boys with a blend of love, discipline, and humor that shaped their close-knit family. When their youngest son started school, Beverly felt it was time for her to re-enter the working world. With a natural curiosity and an eagerness to better their situation, she found herself drawn to the real estate business. It was the early 2000s when she began her journey in the field, a profession that would prove to be a perfect fit for her bright personality and natural ability to connect with people. Just as it seemed they were getting a foothold on their finances and looking toward a more stable future, tragedy struck. In 2003, their world was upended when 19-year-old Christopher, their youngest son, was killed in a car accident. The loss was unfathomable, a blow that shattered their hearts into 1,000 pieces. Chris left behind a baby girl, Bailey, just a toddler at the time, and the grief that followed was profound and unrelenting. The home they had built with so much love now felt haunted by sorrow, every corner of it echoing with the absence of their beloved son. So, they made the heart-wrenching decision to move once again. Though the pain of losing Christopher never fully faded, the arrival of more grandchildren gave Beverly and Carl fresh reasons to smile. Beverly doted on her grandchildren, begging her sons, half-jokingly, to bring her even more babies to spoil. The love that radiated through their family was palpable, and they remained closer than ever despite the terrible loss they had endured. As they reached their 20th wedding anniversary, Carl and Beverly decided to renew their vows, a milestone worthy of celebration. Their original wedding had been a modest affair, a quick visit to City Hall without much pomp or ceremony. This time, Beverly wanted to do it right. She found the perfect dress, the kind of dream gown she hadn't been able to afford back then, and they indulged in the ceremony they had always deserved. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of all they had survived together. With renewed energy, Beverly poured herself into a real estate career, earning her license and joining the Cry Like a Realtor group. Her personality, bright, funny, confident, was perfect for sales. She had a natural charm that people remembered, a big, goofy laugh that was contagious and filled every room she entered. Her enthusiasm and warmth quickly translated into success, and she soon rose to become one of the top 5 realtors in the state. Life felt like it was on an upswing, and she thrived in this new chapter. Even as she turned 50, Beverly showed no signs of slowing down. She began training for marathons, her spirit as lively as ever, and she and Carl traveled together, savoring this new stage of their lives. Then came that fateful evening. September 25, 2014, began like any other day, with the rhythm of work and family flowing as usual. Beverly had an appointment to show a house later that evening, a viewing with a young married couple. They were eager buyers, looking to escape the busy hum of city life for something quieter, more rural, and this property seemed perfect for them. Beverly had been trying to sell the place for a while, and she was hopeful that this would finally be the right fit. Financially, things had been tighter than usual, and closing a deal on this house would be a much-needed boost. As a seasoned realtor with over a decade of experience, Beverly knew the potential risks of meeting clients alone. It wasn't the first time she had done it, and her sense of caution was always present, but nothing bad had ever happened before. She was careful. She always wrote down the names and addresses of the clients and shared them with Carl just in case. That day was no different. Beverly texted Carl, telling him about the showing and promising to pick up some Mexican food for dinner afterward. "Mexican later, my treat," she had written with affection. She gave him the address, 1422 Old River Drive in Scott, and the names of the couple she was meeting. She signed off the text with a simple, loving message. "Love you, see you soon." And with that, Beverly set off, unaware that this routine evening was about to take a dark and tragic turn. One that would send shockwaves through her family and community, forever altering the life she had built so carefully over decades. Beverly had no way of knowing, no inkling of the dark fate that was about to unfold as she left for what should have been a routine house showing. The names, the details she had been given by the prospective buyers, all seemed in order, as they always had before. She had been thorough, careful even, as she always was. But everything she believed about that evening was a carefully crafted lie. The young couple she was supposed to meet didn't exist. The entire setup was a facade, a trap designed to ensnare her. As time stretched on and the early evening slipped into night, Carl began to worry. He hadn't heard from Beverly since she'd left for the showing. At first, he tried to reason with himself. She was probably just caught up. After all, real estate showings could sometimes run long. It wasn't unusual for a conversation with a buyer to drift into an hour or two. He shared his concerns with their son, Carl Jr., who worked in real estate too and knew the ins and outs of the business. "It's not that late yet," Carl Jr. reassured his father. "She probably just lost track of time." But Carl Sr. couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. His intuition gnawed at him, a subtle panic rising in his chest. Beverly always called or texted. Even if she was running late, she wouldn't have gone this long without sending a quick update. The worry deepened, and Carl finally decided to go check on her himself. When he pulled up to the address Beverly had given him, the quiet, rural property on Old River Drive, his heart skipped. Her car was still there, parked outside the house just as she had said. For a brief moment, a wave of relief washed over him. She must be inside. Maybe she had forgotten to check her phone. But as Carl got out of his car and walked closer, the unsettling feeling in his gut returned. Carl glanced through the window of Beverly's car, his eyes locking on the passenger seat. There, undisturbed, was her purse and notebook, things she would never leave behind if she were heading out or had planned to be gone long. The front door of the house was wide open, a yawning darkness beyond it. No lights were on inside, no signs of life at all. He stepped cautiously into the house, calling her name, the emptiness of the space swallowing the sound of his voice. Room after room, there was no sign of her. And then, in the last empty room, something inside him sank. A heavy weight pressed against his chest, and his hand fumbled for his phone. In a panic, he called 911. By the time law enforcement arrived, the house was filled with a sense of dread. Family, friends, and colleagues, those closest to Beverly, had gathered on the cold, dark driveway. It was now well past midnight. Beverly had been missing for over 6 hours. Her real estate friends had a safety protocol, a secret code of sorts, that they would use in situations where they felt uneasy. If someone ever felt unsafe, they'd send a message asking about a folder, a harmless-sounding question that doubled as a distress signal. Beverly's best friend Brenda sent the text, hoping against hope for a response. "Did you leave the folder on your desk?" she typed. She waited, staring at her phone, praying for the reassuring buzz of a reply. But the phone remained silent. Then Carl's phone lit up. For a brief, breathtaking second, everyone's spirits lifted. The message was from Beverly's phone. A wave of relief crashed over the crowd until they read the words on the screen. "Sorry, phone being dead. Having drinks now." The air turned cold again. Something wasn't right. Beverly didn't drink, and everyone she would have been with was standing there, worried sick about her. She wasn't the type to blow off messages or disappear for hours without a word. Whoever had sent that text, it wasn't Beverly. Detectives soon had a lead. Someone in the neighborhood had seen something. A neighbor across the street told them they had spotted a black car parked in front of the house earlier that evening before Beverly arrived. The car was parked at an odd angle, its trunk backed up close to the front door. The neighbor had seen a man step out of the car, a skinny white male with short hair. But after that, they hadn't noticed anything unusual. There was no sound, no signs of a struggle. Just a car and a man, and then silence. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The police now had a description and a vague timeline to work with. At the time, Little Rock had a notably high crime rate. Violent crime in the area was nearly quadruple the national average, and detectives were prepared to consider every possible lead. As they processed the scene for evidence, it became clear that Beverly's phone, which had been moving for hours, was now turned off or dead. Every second that passed felt heavier, the clock ticking on what could be a matter of life or death. While police worked inside the house, combing through every detail, Beverly's friends and fellow real estate agents weren't standing still. They sprang into action, scouring the area, posting flyers, and spreading the word as far and wide as they could. Real estate agent Stacy Medlock, a colleague of Beverly's, searched the surrounding area herself, her voice thick with emotion as she spoke to reporters. "We just want her safe," she said. "We want her back with her family." Dozens of other realtors joined the search, their own worries echoing in their actions. They, too, felt the weight of danger, the sudden realization that what happened to Beverly could happen to any of them. Self-defense classes were filling up, and new safety measures were being implemented across the industry. No one would show a house alone anymore. Colleagues would travel in pairs at the very least. Some firms closed their doors entirely in solidarity, their hearts heavy with fear and uncertainty. It wasn't just the real estate community that mobilized, though. Over 200 volunteers from the community at large joined the search efforts, combing through every inch of ground they could cover, hoping for a miracle. Find Beverly began to trend online, spreading across social media, pulling in support from people who had never met her but were touched by her story. She wasn't just a missing person anymore. She was a symbol, a mother, a grandmother, a woman loved by so many. And as the search continued, the sense of dread deepened. Time was slipping away, and every passing hour without news felt like an eternity. Carl Carter was still in a state of disbelief. The life he'd shared with Beverly for over 3 decades had suddenly plunged into a surreal nightmare. As the hours dragged on, so did the torment of not knowing what had happened to his wife. Between actively searching and coordinating with the police, Carl turned to the media, desperate for any lead, any glimmer of hope that could bring Beverly back to him. His voice trembled during interviews, a mixture of helplessness and determination. "I heard she had a cash buyer," he said, recounting the last conversation they'd had. "It was a referral, and she was excited. By 9 o'clock, I knew something was wrong. By 8, I felt it. But I waited till 8:30 to act." His desperation was palpable. each word carrying the weight of his fear. "I just want my wife back. I beg anyone out there, if you've got her, just drop her off somewhere. Leave her on a sidewalk and drive away. Just let her come home." Carl's grief was raw, and his words echoed a bitter truth. "There's some crazy people in this world. I'm sorry, but it's true. I just pray they'll be better than that." The line lingered in the air, a grim reminder that despite Beverly's skill and years of experience, no amount of preparation could have protected her from the malevolent forces at play. Beverly had been in real estate for over 12 years, and she was nothing if not good at her job. Her instincts were sharp, her professionalism undeniable. But that day, one person, one predator, had shattered all of that. The first and most important step in the investigation was to conduct a thorough search of the house where Beverly was last seen. Who had she met there? What had gone wrong? The details she left behind provided a few leads. The names of the supposed cash buyers, Stephen and Crystal Adams, were written neatly in her notebook. But when police tried to trace the phone numbers Beverly had noted, they quickly hit a wall. The numbers were untraceable, recently created using disposable devices. The names were fake, designed to deceive. However, investigators weren't deterred. By working backwards from those burner phones, they finally unearthed a name: Crystal Lowry. But Crystal wasn't their main suspect. She had no criminal record, nothing that would tie her to a kidnapping. But her husband, Aaron Lewis, was another story altogether. Aaron Lewis, a 33-year-old career criminal, had been in and out of trouble for most of his life. His rap sheet was long and varied. At just 14, he'd been sent to prison for 6 years after robbing a bank. After his release, he'd kept his hands dirty, transporting stolen cars, committing fraud, robbing homes and businesses. Aaron had a knack for deceit and violence. He and Crystal were estranged, but still living together, a fact that made investigators zero in on him even more. With his history and proximity to Crystal, all signs pointed toward Aaron as the man behind Beverly's disappearance. Law enforcement quickly ramped up their efforts. They issued a Be on the Lookout alert, BOLO, for Aaron, circulating his face in the hopes that someone would recognize him. They were now convinced he had kidnapped Beverly and was holding her somewhere. Days passed, and the urgency of the situation only grew more intense. On September 28th, Aaron Lewis's luck ran out, sort of. He crashed his car. While being taken to the hospital for minor injuries, Aaron managed to escape, slipping out before anyone could officially discharge him. His face was all over the news, however, and it wasn't long before someone spotted him. A sharp-eyed citizen recognized the fugitive and promptly called 911. Within hours, police had Aaron Lewis in custody. But even as they dragged him in for questioning, it became immediately apparent that Aaron wasn't going to make things easy. He walked into the interrogation room with an air of smug confidence, as if the whole thing were a game he had control over. Cold, calculating, and wholly unfazed, Aaron clearly relished the fact that the police had to come to him. He held all the cards, and he knew it. Without hesitation, Aaron handed over his phone to the investigators, almost taunting them with what they would find. "Oh, actually," he said with eerie calmness, "I'll let you listen to something. Then you'll know I'm serious." What followed was a recording that sent a chill down every listener's spine. Beverly's voice, strong and calm despite the terror she must have been feeling, echoed through the room. "Carl, it's Beverly. I just want to let you know I'm okay. I haven't been hurt. Just do what he says, and please don't call the police. If you call the police, it could be bad. I love you very much." Hearing her voice was both a relief and a horror. Beverly was alive, but the situation was dire. In the recording, she was composed, remarkably so. Her strength was evident, even though she must have been terrified beyond belief. She was trapped in a nightmare, but her focus remained on keeping her family safe. As investigators listened to the chilling message, they worked to piece together what had happened. Aaron admitted to going inside the house with Beverly, under the pretense of needing pictures to show his wife. The photos Beverly had taken were shaky and blurry. Clear signs, they thought, that she had sensed something was wrong. She was in a rush, eager to leave. But before she could make it to the front door, Aaron had pulled out a taser and immobilized her. "You're about to have a very bad day," he had said to her, his voice filled with malice. "You're being kidnapped." From there, the nightmare only worsened. Beverly had walked into what she thought was a routine showing, a simple meeting with potential buyers. But instead, she had been lured into a carefully planned trap. Aaron had no intention of buying the house. His plan was something much darker, something that went beyond a mere crime of opportunity. At that moment, the weight of Beverly's fate hung in the balance. Investigators worked frantically to track her down before it was too late. They knew Aaron was capable of terrible things. He was a man who thrived on manipulation, someone who had spent his life deceiving others and evading the law. They feared what he might do next. The search intensified, with every passing second feeling like an eternity. Family, friends, and an entire community waited in anguish, hoping for a miracle, praying for Beverly's safe return. But the clock was ticking, and the grim reality of what Aaron Lewis was capable of loomed large over them all. The discovery of Beverly Carter's body was devastating, shattering the final sliver of hope that her family, friends, and community had clung to. On September 30, 2014, 5 days after she was last seen, her body was uncovered in a shallow grave at a cement plant just north of Little Rock, a place Aaron Lewis had once worked. Bound, with her face completely wrapped in duct tape, the autopsy confirmed that Beverly had died from suffocation. The brutality of her death was beyond what anyone could have imagined, and the discovery turned what had been a missing persons case into a full-blown homicide investigation. The crime scene was a grim confirmation of the worst fears. In Aaron's car, police found traces of duct tape matching the material used to bind Beverly. They also recovered strands of her hair, further solidifying his involvement. At his home, they discovered Beverly's phone. It was no longer a question of whether Aaron was involved, but how deep his depravity ran. Alongside Aaron, investigators turned their attention to his estranged wife, Crystal Lowry. Though she initially tried to distance herself from the murder, her role in the kidnapping became impossible to ignore. Crystal was arrested shortly after Aaron. In contrast to her husband's game playing, Crystal was far more cooperative with the police. She didn't attempt to deceive or prolong the investigation. Instead, she admitted almost immediately to her part in the crime, though she was quick to shift the blame for the actual murder onto Aaron. According to her account, the plot to kidnap Beverly had been born out of financial desperation. Crystal explained that their marital struggles had left them unable to afford to move out of their shared home. They needed money, and their twisted solution was to target a married woman who worked alone in a high-earning job. After a simple online search, Beverly's image appeared, and that was all it took. Beverly, a respected and experienced real estate agent, became the target of their malicious plot. Crystal claimed that although she participated in the kidnapping, she never intended to harm Beverly. She said she hadn't wanted to be directly involved, which is why Aaron had lured Beverly into the trap alone. When Beverly arrived at the property to meet who she thought were prospective buyers, Aaron ambushed her, forcing her into the trunk of his car. He then sent a chilling message to Crystal, a picture of Beverly in the trunk with the words, "It's done." The horror didn't end there. Aaron had driven Beverly to his house, where Crystal awaited, standing guard with a stun gun. Beverly, terrified and bound, was locked in their bathroom. It was only then, Crystal claimed, that Aaron began to panic. He realized Beverly had seen prescription medication in the house and could identify him. According to Crystal's testimony, this was when Aaron decided to kill her. With cold detachment, Aaron wrapped Beverly's face in duct tape. It took 5 agonizing minutes for her to suffocate. The details Crystal shared painted a picture of unimaginable horror. Beverly, who had gone to work that day expecting nothing more than a routine property showing, had instead spent her final hours in fear, subjected to an ordeal that was almost beyond comprehension. Her last moments were filled with terror as her captors methodically carried out their twisted plan. Crystal claimed that she initially refused to help dispose of the body, but Aaron eventually convinced her. The two of them then drove to a nearby Walmart, where they purchased a shovel. All she had to do, he said, was hold the light while he dug the grave. After they buried Beverly's body, they made a stop at a Waffle House. The casualness of their actions, immediately following such a heinous crime, left investigators and the public horrified. With Crystal's confession, both she and Aaron were charged with capital murder and kidnapping. Aaron, unsurprisingly, showed no remorse. In fact, he seemed to relish the attention. From the start, he played a twisted game with the police and the media, savoring the opportunity to be in the spotlight. His interviews with reporters showed a man who thrived on the attention his crimes had brought him. Even as he faced trial, Aaron saw himself as the star of his own dark story. While Crystal was cooperative, Aaron took every opportunity to delay and disrupt the proceedings. He continually fired his legal counsel, forcing delays in the trial. At one point, he even chose to represent himself, reveling in the control it gave him. He refused to cooperate during interrogations, dragging the investigation on for hours. He led police on false trails, dropping hints and clues only to retract them later. His manipulations seemed endless, a final insult to the family he had already shattered. Aaron's trial became a media spectacle. After months of toying with the justice system, his defense team concocted a shocking new story. They claimed that Beverly had willingly gone to meet Aaron for consensual sex and that her death was an accident. According to this narrative, it was Crystal, not Aaron, who had killed her. The audacity of this defense was staggering, not only because it so clearly contradicted the evidence, but also because of the cruelty it inflicted on Beverly's grieving family. In the end, the facts were undeniable. Aaron's attempts to shift blame and manipulate the system failed. Crystal had already accepted a plea deal, agreeing to testify against her husband in exchange for a reduced sentence. Although Crystal's involvement in the murder was undeniable, her willingness to cooperate allowed her to avoid the death penalty. Aaron, on the other hand, showed no such willingness to accept responsibility. He continued to insist on his innocence, even as the evidence against him mounted. The trial of Aaron Lewis, the man responsible for the brutal murder of real estate agent Beverly Carter, was as much about seeking justice as it was about exposing the shocking lengths to which people will go to avoid accountability. The courtroom became a battleground where the truth about Beverly's final moments was often overshadowed by Aaron's defense team, who attempted to paint an entirely different picture of events. From the outset, the prosecution was resolute in ensuring that Beverly's suffering was not diminished. In opening arguments, the prosecutor was blunt. Unspeakable, terrifying suffering. She died a horrible, terrifying death that no one deserves. Beverly loved her life. The last thing Beverly experienced was unspeakable terror at that man's hands. The jury was silent, absorbing the gravity of those words. Beverly, who was well loved by her family, friends, and community, had her life snuffed out in the most terrifying way imaginable, and the prosecution made it clear that this would be the foundation of their case. Yet Aaron's defense team took a much different approach. In a cruel and heartless strategy, they sought to discredit Beverly, insinuating that her death was not the result of a cold-blooded murder, but rather a consequence of her supposed bad decisions. They focused on her personal life, her job, her finances, and even her marriage, trying to convince the jury that she had been involved in an affair with Aaron. The defense argued that she was experiencing a midlife crisis and was making irrational choices, including the decision to meet Aaron under the guise of a consensual relationship. We've got to look at this truthfully, not from a fantasy. Beverly was making bad decisions at this point in her life, Aaron's lawyer said, attempting to plant doubt in the jury's mind. Everybody has a secret life, he added, as if to imply that Beverly's tragic death was somehow her own fault. These claims were devastating to her family, who had to sit through the brutal dissection of her character, hearing false and twisted accusations about someone they loved dearly. They maintained a stoic silence, knowing the real Beverly, a woman who was dedicated to her work, her family, and her friends. Carl Carter, Beverly's husband, took the stand and passionately defended his wife's name. He acknowledged that their marriage, like any, had faced challenges, but he insisted that they had an amazing relationship. "My wife was my best friend, and I was hers," he testified, his voice steady despite the heavy weight of grief and anger. Carl's testimony was crucial in painting a true picture of the woman Beverly was, and it stood in stark contrast to the ugly narrative being spun by Aaron's defense team. When Aaron himself took the stand in his own defense, his performance only served to further reveal his lack of remorse. His testimony was rife with fabrications, and his demeanor became more combative and angry the more his story unraveled. He insisted that Beverly had willingly gone to his house to engage in a sexual encounter, and that Crystal, his estranged wife, had killed her while he was out. According to Aaron, all he had done was bury the body, an absurd claim in the face of overwhelming evidence against him. The prosecution quickly dismantled Aaron's version of events. They played the heart-wrenching recording of Beverly's voice, a message intended for her husband, Carl, in which she pleaded for her life. "It could be bad. Just want you to know I love you very much." This was a message from a woman in the clutches of terror, not someone who had voluntarily entered into a deadly situation. Aaron, desperate to maintain control of his narrative, then claimed that the recording was somehow created using artificial intelligence, a ludicrous assertion that only further damaged his credibility. As the trial entered its third day, the prosecution brought out its star witness, Crystal Lowry, Aaron's ex-wife. Having taken a plea deal to testify against Aaron, Crystal's testimony was critical in painting the true picture of the crime. She confirmed what the prosecution had long suspected, that the entire kidnapping had been planned and executed by both her and Aaron. Crystal testified that the goal had been to kidnap Beverly and hold her for ransom. When the ransom didn't materialize as they had hoped, Aaron had no choice but to change his plans, ultimately resulting in Beverly's horrific death. Crystal recounted how Aaron had initially intended to hide Beverly in an abandoned part of the concrete plant. But due to unforeseen changes at the site, this plan fell apart. With Beverly bound in the back of his car, Aaron found himself with no choice but to bring her back to their home. Crystal recalled the chilling moment when Aaron returned with Beverly, bound with duct tape and terrified. The couple kept her locked in their bathroom while Aaron attempted to retrieve Beverly's purse and bank card. The prosecution showed how Beverly had been forced to record a 12-second ransom message for Carl. It was a final, desperate attempt by Aaron to extract money, but the message was never sent. Carl would not hear his wife's voice again until long after her death. Crystal's testimony was damning and left little room for doubt. The defense's attempts to portray Aaron as innocent or as a man acting to protect Crystal crumbled under the weight of the evidence and her testimony. Despite the overwhelming case against him, Aaron's defense team pressed on, arguing that Beverly had gone to his house willingly and that there was no evidence of a kidnapping. They tried to paint him as a man dedicated to protecting his wife, claiming that everything Aaron did was to shield Crystal from the consequences of her actions. However, the jury saw through this hollow defense. After just an hour of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of capital murder and kidnapping. At the request of Beverly's family, the prosecutor took the death penalty off the table, and Aaron was sentenced to 2 life terms without the possibility of parole. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. Crystal Lowry, having accepted her plea deal, received a 30-year sentence for her role in the crime. In 2020, she petitioned to have her sentence reduced, but this request was denied, ensuring she would continue to serve her time. Aaron, meanwhile, would go on to face further legal troubles. In 2021, he was back in court for assaulting prison guards, his violent tendencies continuing even behind bars.